thank you so much for joining this conversation today, Attorney Elena.
It's my pleasure.
Yes.
Should I say a few things, or do you want to just start shooting questions at me?
Oh, no, please. I want people to know who you are. I'm just going to give a quick introduction, and then please take the vehicle, and because she's amazing. For those of you that don't know, this is Elena Pop, and she is, I believe, the executive director of the Eviction Defense Network.
Right.
And she is a champion for tenant rights. I actually know about Eviction Defense Network for a while now, but I've never actually met, either digitally or in person, Elena Pop. And I am just so grateful that she allowed me to do this today for the community, for you. So thank you so much. And, without further ado, I'm just going to, ask the attorney to talk about herself, her amazingness, and for her to just take the wheel and just amaze us all.
Okay. So the Eviction Defense Network is a nonprofit organization. We represent tenants in eviction cases. We're at the forefront of stopping gentrification in Los Angeles County. And we provide services to 5,000 people a year, focused primarily on stopping displacement. During the COVID crisis, we have started a hotline and a way to get access to an attorney via email. And we are very active on social media, making sure that people know their rights and their obligations and what they need to do to get the protections that our elected officials are piecemeal giving us. So let's start with the governor. So the governor issued an executive order that does really very little, almost nothing at all. If you follow the procedures that he wants you to follow, what you will get is an extra 55 days to file an eviction action if your landlord files an eviction action against you when you don't pay the rent. So the way that it would work is you don't have the money to pay the rent. By April 7th, you have to send your landlord a letter. That letter explains, I don't have the money to pay the rent. To get a copy of that letter, you can send an email to info@E for eviction, D for defense, N for network.la. info@edn.la gives you a fact sheet that explains your rights. It's focused on tenants that live in LA County, and that it has a sample letter that you can just print and fill in, or just fill in and send electronically to your landlord. If you do that, your landlord can still file an eviction action. If you do that, the landlord can still serve you a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit. But instead of having 5 days to file an answer in court, you'll have 60 days. And that's important because we're going to get overloaded with a tsunami of evictions, and so we really need that extra time, and you'll need that extra time. So do it, okay? So now let's go to what our local elected officials are doing. If you live anywhere in the state of California, and I know this is national, but it's different in every city. So you have to find out what your rights are in your own city. So in LA County, for instance, we have a county, and then we have all these little cities within the county. So the city of LA, the city of West Hollywood, Culver City, Inglewood. And then there's also sections of the county that are not incorporated into cities, and we call that unincorporated LA County. And each of those areas have their own protections. Most of them do not prohibit the filing of an eviction action. Most of them allow for a defense to an eviction if your landlord tries to evict you. So the way this would pan out is you don't have the money to pay the rent in April. You send the letter to the landlord. The landlord probably harasses you, because that's what's been happening, into coming up with the money or more evidence. You go back to the language in the letter and you say, I've given you what I've got, and that's all I'm going to give you. And then the landlord gives you a 3-day notice to pay rent or quit. Your response is going to be to get all freaked out, but don't. It's just a piece of paper. The only way a piece of paper can hurt you is if you get a paper cut. Okay, it is just a piece of paper. What you're going to do in response is wait. If the landlord files an eviction action, you're going to send an email to askanattorney@edn.la, and we are going to give you further advice. We're also anticipating.
So I'm going to ask a couple of suggested questions, and these questions are written actually by the attorney, so we know they're good. Number one, is there a moratorium on eviction?
Right now, there is not a moratorium on evictions at the state level, nor at the city or county level. There are a few cities that did use strong language. Like, think about what a moratorium is. A moratorium is a prohibition on doing X. So a moratorium on evictions would be a prohibition on serving a 3-day notice, a prohibition on serving any notice that starts an eviction, or a prohibition against filing an eviction. So no, there is not a moratorium. Landlords can file and serve notices, no moratorium. What we have is some defenses to those evictions if you follow the instructions for the particular jurisdiction. And so we have prepared this sheet. It is 8 pages long, kind of dense. A lot of advocates are saying that's a little bit too much information, but we have to be smart. We have to read that information and try to figure it out ourselves, and then send an email to ask an attorney if you're still confused. And it's really a good piece if you take the time to really read it and absorb it instead of getting overwhelmed by it. It's a question and answer format. It has really good information. But no, there are no real moratoriums. Now, we may have some good news later on today. There are some decisions being made as we talk, and we will be able to post those. There's also a city council meeting tomorrow that it is essential that people participate in, and I have a little action alert for everyone. I am posting on we'll put it out on info, but we also will put it out on this Facebook group that somebody just put on. It's COVID-19 tenants' rights, hashtag on every fridge. And it's an action alert for today. The city council, has made some headway, but there is a great platform that was put together by advocates. It's called the Healthy LA Coalition. And they kind of shined us on the 27th. Mike Bonin tried really hard, and I think it was Councilmember Rue that backed him up, and we got 7 votes, but we needed 8. So we have an action alert going on right now, getting people to do 60-minute videos of themselves, and then putting it on social media, tagging your own council member, and we give you very specific instructions how to do that. So my 60-second would be, hi, I'm Elena Pop. I'm the executive director of a nonprofit that helps tenants, and I have been spending 12 to 14 hours a day since March 13th, counseling very frightened tenants who are being harassed by their landlords, are being harassed for the rent, are being harassed for evidence, are being threatened with illegal lockouts and illegal utility terminations. Please support the Healthy LA platform and help tenants. And then I take that and I put it all over my social media and tag I'm going to tag the council members that voted against us, and I'm going to tag my own council member. And if enough of us do that, it will create the kind of, what do they care about? They care about money, donations for their campaigns, and they care about votes. And a lot of tenants have risen up in this time. So if we all did that as soon as we finished and got a whole bunch of 60-minute videos out, we would, and I'll put the instructions on the chat. We would get them to adopt the Healthy LA platform, right? And that's what tenants need.
And what exactly right now is in place in protection for tenants right now in LA, specifically right now? What is in place? If there's no moratorium right now on evictions, then what is in place? It doesn't matter how small they are, but what exactly are we protected with in the time of like the virus right now? What is it that is in place?
So let's take it jurisdiction by jurisdiction. So City of Los Angeles. If you are a tenant in the City of Los Angeles and you send a letter to the governor no later than day 7 after your rent is due, so presumably the 7th for most of us. And that letter explains that you have a COVID-19 related reason for not paying your rent. You do not have to include the evidence, but if you have a letter from your employer terminating your employment, or if you have your EDD documents, send them. There's no reason not to. You don't have to send bank records. You don't have to send your underwear size. I mean, they're asking for all kinds of very, very invasive, intrusive information. You don't have to do that. Just send the letter and what evidence you feel comfortable sending. And if you do that, you will have, and the landlord tries to evict you, you'll have 55 days to file your answer. If you're a tenant in the city of Los Angeles, when we do that answer, we're going to say, this tenant had a COVID-19 related reason for not paying the rent, and therefore this eviction is invalid, and we are likely to win that eviction lawsuit. Mm-hmm. Now, in Los Angeles, you have 12 months to come in Los Angeles City. You have 12 months to come up with the money. So unless we get rent forgiveness in 12 months, the landlord's going to go after you for that money. So we are continuing to fight for rent forgiveness and mortgage relief, because we have to take care of, if tenants aren't going to pay the rent, especially small mom and pop landlords are going to potentially lose their property. So we need to make sure that we also do mortgage relief, especially for mom and pop landlords. And so, but we're going to have another tsunami of evictions in 12 months unless we get rent forgiveness and mortgage relief. But that's the protection we have right now. The other protection in Los Angeles is sometimes we violate our leases, right? We found a cute little kitty and we never told the landlord that we had the cute little kitty, and all of a sudden the landlord doesn't want the cute little kitty, but it's a violation of the lease. You can't get evicted for that during the crisis. Or your friend needed a place to stay. Anyways, so the other protection you have is if you have unauthorized occupants, people that are not on the lease, you can't get evicted for that. There's something called the Ellis Act, and if you don't know what it is, you don't need to know what it is. But if you have an Ellis Act eviction, and you would know that already if you have one, you have another 60 days, a little reprieve of an additional 60 days. So those are the protections in LA City. Now let's go to unincorporated LA County. In unincorporated LA County, you have that same state protection with the extra 55 days if you write the letter. And you have 6 months to come up with the rent. The LA County ordinance sounds more like a moratorium. A landlord shall not issue a notice, shall not file a lawsuit. But in effect, landlords could still file lawsuits, although we're hoping that later on this afternoon we'll have some better news about that. Okay?
So the second question is, what is likely to happen? I apologize. Step by step if I don't pay my rent.
Okay. So I often tell my clients I neither read minds or predict the future, but here's what I think will happen. Most landlords are going to harassment first. So there was just an LA Times article about that. They are demanding the rent. They are threatening people with immediate eviction. They are telling people they're going to lose their cases and lose their housing. And they're telling people their credit's going to be ruined. So they're going to harassment first. Why? Why are they going to harassment? Because they know the law is on your side. So they're trying to lie to you and get you to cough up what little money you have, which you need for food, or they're trying to get you to sign payment plans. You don't have to do any of that right now, okay? You do not have to do any of that right now. All you have to do is send the letter. If you send an email to info@edn.la, we'll send you the whole advice sheet. And in the advice sheet is the letter. You send the letter, and then when they email you back, you just email them back. Thank you for your response. I have provided you what I'm legally required to provide you already. And then don't get freaked out. landlords freak people out, and I recognize that there's this unequal power between landlords and tenants, but it's only because tenants give landlords that power. You don't have to give your landlord that power. You can just say, I've done what I'm going to do. It's all I'm required to do. A 3-day notice to pay rent or quit. If you do, don't worry about it. You've already done what you need to do. You might get a summons and complaint for eviction. If you do, you're going to send an email to askanatttorney@edn.la. And then many months from now, we are going to figure out what to do about that eviction. The courts in LA County were already 8 months behind on evicting people. It was taking 8 months to get an eviction all the way through. Imagine all of these other thousands and thousands and thousands of cases. A smart landlord is not going to file that eviction action. And a less smart landlord is going to file it. And as soon as they see our name on the pleadings on the other side, they're going to negotiate and dismiss it, and you're going to be okay. All right?
What if the landlord threatens the tenants to shut off power or water, for example? So, or if they actually do?
That is our biggest concern right now. So people need to understand that right now the courts are closed. The landlord can still file an eviction action, but you have until the 17th to respond unless you write that letter, and then you're going to have 60 days. And the sheriff isn't doing lockout. So a landlord that's going to follow the law, you're going to be fine. We are, though, getting a pretty dramatic uptick increase in landlords using what we call self-help, illegal self-help. It is a violation of Penal Code Section 418 to do that. Unfortunately, our chief of police doesn't think he has to enforce that penal code. So one of our next campaigns is going to be to get the LAPD to enforce the penal code. In the last couple of days, I've dealt with 6 of these cases. In the most dramatic of the case, we were able to resolve a whole bunch of them by just explaining the law to the landlord. But in the most dramatic of these cases, a family with a diabetic got locked out by the tenants. The LAPD refused to intervene. The council office sent someone out there, but then refused to intervene. And that family ended up losing their housing, because it's not like I can run into court right now to stop that. And by the time we got involved, all their stuff had been removed and had been taken to Hesperia, including all her medications. So it was a pretty dramatic case, but that landlord is going to pay for that, because we are going to sue that landlord. And we just recently settled a case where our elderly client was locked out in the heat for 5 hours. 5 hours in the heat. We settled it for $250,000 for the tenant. So landlords, beware. You do not want to meet Elena Pop in court. It is not a pleasant experience. Do not lock out your tenants, because we are going to make these lockout cases a high priority in our office. And any landlord who dares lock out a tenant is going to see a lawsuit and is going to lose a lot of money.
What is the landlord? And this is a question from Maria. What about if my landlord had increased my rent in May? What will happen next? What will happen then? Is that allowed even right now?
Okay, so the mayor of Los Angeles. So in most of the state, that is probably allowed right now, because this is also city by city. So in Los Angeles, the mayor did issue an ordinance or an executive order that if a landlord issues a rent increase after March 4th, then you don't have to pay it. But if your rent increase was issued before March 4th, then you do have to pay it, unless you have a COVID-19 related reason to not pay it. So if you can't pay it, if you can't pay all of your rent, if you can't pay any of your rent, if you can't pay some of your rent because of a COVID-19 reason, you want to send that letter to the landlord. It's a very simple letter. I've seen a lot of letters on the internet that 5 pages of explaining the story of your life. They don't need the story of your life. They just need to know, dear landlord, I have had a loss of income or increased expense due to the COVID-19 crisis. I can pay X amount of my rent. I can't pay any of my rent. Attached is the proof, if you have it. Or I don't have the evidence right now. I will provide it whenever the law requires it. Okay? And then our letter says, and if you start harassing me, I'm just going to tell you this, so don't harass me, and a couple of other things. Okay? So use our letter. It's a good letter. It's simple. And when you start writing the story of your life out to your landlord, first of all, you're invading your own privacy. And secondly, you're likely to say something that you shouldn't say. We also have been seeing harassment by tenants who disclosed that they had an infected or exposed person in their household. You do not want to reveal that to your landlord or to not disclose if you're infected or exposed.
Okay, so what about, okay, so this is for the current strike that is happening. Some people opted to strike this month. Some of them are thinking about striking for the next month in May. So what protections, like if we do choose to strike due to whatever reason that is happening, like what is the first thing that we should do to protect ourselves, or what should we know about like striking in order for us to go into it, as comfortable as we can or as informed as we can?
Okay, so first I want to make sure that everybody realizes that lawyers can't promote rent strikes. So I'm not promoting any of the rent strikes. I am what I consider to be a lawyer on tap, not on top. That means that if a tenants union comes and tells me we want to do a rent strike, I can give them my opinion about what I think about doing that. And if they choose to do it, we will represent the strikers and we will provide legal advice, but we are not promoting any of the rent strikes, and we're also not deterring people from doing it. There are 3 possibilities right now. The LA Tenants Union is doing a campaign that focuses on putting food first, basic needs first, and are suggesting to people that we don't know how long this crisis is going to last. And because we don't know how long this crisis is going to last, that people need to not pay the rent now. They are also encouraging people who have not seen an economic loss through COVID-19 to strike in solidarity with their more vulnerable neighbors. If you choose to do that and you end up in eviction proceedings, we will represent you whether you had a COVID-19 reason or not. I will put forth that people that have a COVID-19 reason will have a legitimate, strong defense, and people who did it in solidarity will be at greater risk. So we're going to need to figure out how to protect them for the risks that they took. The Alliance of Californians for Community Empowerment, a statewide organization that staffs a very large statewide coalition called Housing Now, is promoting a rent strike in May. They have done a rallying cry to the governor, basically calling him on the fact that he needs to get a dictionary, and if he's going to talk about moratoriums, he should do real moratoriums, which means a prohibition on evictions, and that and that a moratorium is not good enough because it just kicks the can down the road, and then how are people going to pay 4 months rent in any amount of time, right? Can you look at your budget? You have an extra $400, $500, $600 a month after you go back to work to pay back the rent for these months. Most tenants in California will not have that money. So therefore, kicking the can down the road is not good enough. We need rent forgiveness and mortgage relief. And so that's the rallying cry of that rent strike, and it's a rent strike called for May. If you want to participate on that, you sign up so that they know how many people are going to participate, and there you go. What we are recommending that people do for now is make a 4-month budget. Look at all your expenses in that 4 months and look at your reasonable income in that 4 months? Are you in danger of losing your job in a month, in 2 months? Do you have savings now, but that savings isn't going to last for 4 months? Make that budget and then decide what, if anything, you can pay. And if you are not going to pay your full rent, write that letter, use our template, and then, stay on top of it. If you get a 3-day notice, then you can send back that response. I've given you what I can. I am protected by the law. Here's another copy of my letter. If you get a summons and complaint for eviction, you send us an email at askanattorney@edn.la.
Yeah. So what if, for example, if we strike, right, and then we get the 3-day notice for eviction, but then obviously we cannot respond until, in 60 days, they're giving us 55 days to respond, and then what we do and everything. And let's say that we win the case, that everything is okay. Can the landlords still evict us? They can for X reasons, but I'm afraid that if we do strike, for example, then the landlord will take that in the future as retaliation and then evict us for whatever reason.
So what I would say is this, is most people aren't going to have any choice but to not pay the rent, right? Because they don't have it. So, let's take that scenario out again, okay? So, you don't pay the rent because you don't have it or because you're striking in solidarity with your neighbors. You send the letter to the landlord. The landlord starts harassing you. You stick to your guns using the script that is provided in our letter. You get a summons and complaint for eviction. You had a legitimate COVID-related reason to not pay. You defend that eviction. You likely win. You were striking in solidarity. We need to figure out how to make it safe for people who are striking in solidarity. But the problem is you've won this case, but 12 months down the line, if we don't get rent relief, rent forgiveness, then you're going to be facing another eviction for non-payment of rent. So that's really the problem. But let's say that we get rent forgiveness or we somehow figure out how to avoid that second tsunami of evictions, and your landlord is pissed at you because you did not pay your rent. First, they're going to be pissed at a lot of people. So I really don't think there's going to be retaliatory evictions afterwards. But if there is a retaliatory eviction afterwards, then you will have that retaliation defense. So retaliation is not a defense if you're in default in rent, but this scenario presumes that we've resolved the rent issue, either because the federal government gave us enough money to resolve the issue or because the governor did rent forgiveness or whatever it is. We've resolved the money issue, and now the landlord's just after you, just to be after you. Retaliation will be a defense. This is also an opportunity for me to talk a little bit about rent control. For the most part, tenants kind of go through life not even knowing what they're protected by, because it only becomes important to them when their housing is actually challenged. And so many people's housing is challenged, is at risk right now, so people really are interested. So everybody on this call needs to, the second thing you're going to do after we are done today, is you're going to figure out what laws you are protected by. So there's something called rent control. Rent control laws restrict when and how often a landlord can raise the rent. They also restrict what the reasons are that a landlord can evict you. They can't evict you just for no reason at all. The law itself says the reasons. So the way you find out what protects you is you need to know where you live. Do you live in a city with rent control? You live in LA? The answer is yes. We have rent control in LA City, and we have rent control in LA unincorporated, also Santa Monica, West Hollywood, Beverly Hills, Culver City, and Inglewood. So then once you figure out what city you are in, you need to make sure your unit is protected. All of the laws exempt single-family homes, for instance. So you figure out if you are protected, if your unit is protected. If the answer is no, and you find out you're not protected, then you are probably protected by what we call the Tenant Protection Act of 2019. It's really statewide rent control. It's a rent control law that we fought for very hard. Starting March 15th of last year, it was put into law on September 11th and went into effect on January 1st. And it protects just about everyone